show. And my guest today, I'm really excited to talk with Alexandra Shaykevich. Alexandra, thanks for stopping by. We're going to talk about the Environmental Integrity Project. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Neil. Thanks for having me.
So, how did you get started in this? Explain more your background.
Well, I'm an environmental scientist, and the Environmental Integrity Project is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that advocates for the effective enforcement of environmental laws. And we recently released a new report, a new study called Feeding the Plastics Industrial Complex.
You think that we would finally figure out a way, not just in the, how the recycle plastics, right? That it's dangerous for us and we constantly still use it. Is it cheaper to use plastics for bottles and stuff like that than in other ways we use it for containers?
It is cheaper, yeah. Creating virgin or new plastic products, it's very cheap, it's economical. And there are other qualities that make plastics more desirable. They're more durable, flexible, and they help with, for example, long distance shipping and other things. So in many ways, they're more desirable products for companies.
So it's the profit, the bottom line is profits then. Profits and packageability and marketability of the product. That's probably
Somewhat. Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't understand is that plastics are made from fossil fuels. So this is a lifeline for the fossil fuel industry. In a lot of ways, they're being threatened with renewable energies, electric vehicles, new technologies that are pushing out the need for fossil fuels and making room for more sustainable products. But plastics, they're here to stay in a lot of ways. And so this is very much something that the fossil fuel industry is counting on in order to continue business as usual.
and business as usual is something from your research isn't good, right?
Unfortunately, the production of plastics comes with a significant environmental footprint, not just in terms of climate warming, pollution, greenhouse gases that we know is contributing to climate change, but also dangerous pollutants that are affecting the health of nearby communities that are living next door to these plants.
So what was the report kind of, what do you think the major highlights of the report that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, so we took a look at 50 plastics plants that were recently built or expanded in the US over the past, roughly the past decade. And we found that 2/3 of them were received taxpayer subsidies totaling around $9 billion, but 84% of those facilities also violated their air pollution control permits in the past 3 years. And the majority of them, 94% of them, also reported emissions events. These are things like fires, accidents, malfunctions, breakdowns that also released 34 million pounds of pollution in addition to what they emit normally during routine operations.
And how do you kind of enforce this so it doesn't happen?
Well, so these facilities are issued under the Clean Air Act. They're issued permits. So they do have enforceable emissions limits in place. Unfortunately, again, what we found is that 94% of these facilities also release pollution during unauthorized and unregulated upsets or emergency air incidents. Again, these are things that the companies will say are unpreventable. They're things like fires, malfunctions or breakdowns that occur when a facility loses power or when it's first commissioning. And this happens regularly. It happens often. And one of the key findings of our report is that this is a part of their routine operations. This happens so frequently. Almost all of the plants that we looked at had at least one event. We actually counted over 1,200 in the past 5 years. So it's a really significant piece of the puzzle.
So what does the government need to do to stop this from happening?
Well, our report advocates for a few changes. First of all, we think that these plants should not be getting taxpayer money if they can't comply with environmental
Oh, no
law.
doubt.
Yeah, we think that, they shouldn't be rewarded with subsidies if they can't abide by pollution control limits. We also are advocating for other reforms, for example, strict permit limits, and in some cases, outright denials for facilities that manufacture ingredients that are primarily used in single-use plastics. These products are often, they wind up as litter. They clog our waterways. They've been found in breast milk and human blood. So
Oh man.
we don't think that taxpayer funds should be subsidizing pollution. And finally, we think that we need better monitoring to detect pollution around these plants, and we need to make sure that that information is getting to the communities that need it most. So real-time detection and better reporting and accurate reporting.
What are you seeing firsthand because of all these violations? How are the people affected that live by a plant?
Well, there are lots of health effects associated with this pollution, heart attacks, asthma, and sometimes even some of these pollutants are carcinogens. So benzene is something that these plants emit, and it is a known carcinogen. Other types of pollutants as well. So there are many just tangible health consequences. Another thing that we heard when we interviewed folks living next door to these plants is that there's a lot of flaring going on. There's a lot of noise and light pollution. These plants are designed to operate 24/7, 365. So, you can imagine when there is an incident or a flaring event, so to speak, you see pollution that lights up the night sky. You hear noise from generators. When they're being constructing these plants, there are trucks that carry materials up and down the road. There's dust associated with that. So, there's water pollution as well. A lot of these plants handle hazardous materials on site. And I think a lot of folks know there was the Ohio train derailment that recently took place, and that was carrying vinyl chloride monomer. A lot of that's something that's used in the manufacturing of plastics. So there are so many other effects outside of just the immediate air emissions. So.
No, it makes sense, and it's concerning because do people really know that are how close if you're living north to one of these plants that's violated? So let's just say, yeah, oh, I have a plant. It helps, create jobs, and I'm going to support it and not know the adverse health effects that I'm going to deal with for a long time because I lived here. Or is there when they do get these violations? Does the community find out?
They do, but sometimes not in real time. But these companies are required to report these violations, usually to the state environmental agencies, as well as the EPA. All of our data that we've collected in this report, it's company reported data. It comes from state agencies and the EPA. But again, 84% of these facilities violated their air permits just in the past year. So it's more than the majority. It's over half of these plants. And I think one of the reasons that we published this report and one of the reasons that we think this information is important is because communities across the country are now being faced with the tough question of should we allow a plastics plant to be built next door in order to create jobs in our local community. And we think it's important for communities to understand the ramifications of what might come alongside that. It comes with taxpayer handouts and illegal pollution that often puts communities at risk.
That's crazy. And I start thinking about this, with this situation, what can we do? Like, is there anything like, I guess this report, will you find out if you're near one of these plants in the report?
So
Will it?
we do provide the locations of all of these plants. I think it's also important to note that there are a lot of plants being proposed. So our report highlights at least 10 new facilities, as well as 17 expansions at existing facilities that are being proposed in the next 5 years alone. So this has greatly increased the production capacity of plastic resins and other ingredients used to manufacture single-use plastics. And we do provide those locations. We also, we're counting on state agencies and policymakers to step up and to enforce existing environmental laws, impose, again, stricter pollution control limits in these facilities permits, and to impose penalties that are proportionate to the amount of pollution that these companies are emitting. Oftentimes what we see is that it's actually cheaper for a company just to pay a fine than it is to install a pollution
Oh,
control.
totally. So the only way you stop it, what happens here? Is there a concern if we do have these? Do you think that I know you're not political. Do you feel that the EPA has not done as great job as they did 4 years ago? Or are you seeing it's about the same all as each time you have this report?
Unfortunately, this is a very persistent issue. One thing that we highlight is that these plants, they received $9 billion, according to our analysis, in taxpayer subsidies. That's about 278 million per plant. And that means that just one plastics plant is receiving more money from taxpayers' subsidies than the entire budgets of two state agencies combined. That's the Louisiana Department of Environmental Protection and the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality. They are in charge of policing the majority of these plastics plants, which is where they're clustered and located. And they're also responsible for policing all other emission sources. So power plants, oil and gas wells, any type of industrial emitter of air pollution. And it's a huge task. So one plastics plant getting more money than two state agencies combined in a given year, that's a really significant difference. So we need to make sure that these agencies, in order for them to function properly, they also need our support, and they do some really important work.
Okay. Best place people can get the report, where can they go?
Yeah, you can find out more information at environmentalintegrity.org. And again, the report is called Feeding the Plastics Industrial Complex.
All right. Thanks, Alexandra. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil.
You're listening and watching The Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.